It's a real honor and pleasure to be here today with such a distinguished gathering. I'm here as UNDP resident representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also as a former UN volunteer with Renata and also Sakaguchi, who were in Cambodia with that Soweto. And clearly, UNTAC and Mr. Akashi and Mr. Segawa-san would be in best position to talk about it. Was a unique and incredible odyssey, and it displayed some of the best that what the UN has to offer, but also some of the worst. It offered the idealistic character of the United Nations, and therefore also selflessness, as reflected by the sacrifice of Atsuhito Nakata. And some of its more realistic and sometimes cynical and less optimal dimensions as well. It's important to remember that UNTAC was surfing on and was also the expression of a wave of hope immediately at the end of the Cold War. And it was believed that it opened a new era in international relations, but not everything went very smoothly. Now, how significant is the tragic event of 8 April 1993 for UN volunteers who were there and who were working closely with Atsuhito Nakata? It was a traumatic but also life-changing event and circumstance. For UNTAC, the UN Transitional Authority in Cambodia, it was a test to the international community's resolve in Cambodia. And certainly as well for Japan, I mean, it was a very decisive moment in a new international role and involvement. Japan certainly played an important role, and needless to say, I'd like to commend as well, following the Deputy Executive Coordinator of the UN Volunteer Program, the role played by the Deputy Executive Coordinator of UNV at the time, Hasegawa-san, who contributed certainly to the success of the mission by allowing volunteers to continue their mission until the end. And clearly, UNTAC was a very chaotic and very risky business. Fortunately, the UN has made progress in the management of security and security risks since then with UN Department of Security and Safety, and the doctrine of the UN with respect to security and safety has evolved. Now it's no longer about how and when to leave, it's about how to stay on by either accepting, transferring, or mitigating risks. And it's a very important evolution in the doctrine of the UN in terms of security and safety. Now, the event also highlighted both the potential and the inherent limitations of UN peacekeeping forces. And in that, it had far-reaching implications for UN peacekeeping and the use of UN military forces, as was also demonstrated later on by the genocide in Rwanda and also in the former Yugoslavia with Srebrenica. Now, some of the main lessons that can be drawn from 8 April 1993 and the ambush that killed both Atsuhito Nakata but also Lex Sapir, the Cambodian interpreter, working side by side with him. Now, the main reason for the success of the operation was the resolve of the Cambodian people themselves after 25 years of conflict to bring about change. So that's a very important lesson. Also, bringing democratic governance, building peace takes time, and it involves risks, including security risks, and they need to be anticipated, catered in, and managed. And also what happened immediately after highlighted the importance of not giving up in the face of adversity so as to complete the mission. It's particularly significant and symbolic that an international volunteer, Atsuhito Nakata from Japan, and a Cambodian interpreter like Sophia, who were killed at the same time, the same day, in the same ambush. UN volunteers were working side by side with Cambodians, embodying and carrying with them the hope of the Cambodians themselves. That is the true spirit of the United Nations, and it's the true spirit of volunteerism as well. UN volunteers made a difference because of their massive number. They made a difference because they had a distinct contribution and role in the UN operation, which was relatively essential and high profile. And also they made a difference because they worked side by side with Cambodians. Certainly a sizable number of volunteers left after the ambush of 8 April 1993, I think about 10%, but the large majority continued till the end of the mission, and quite a number continued to work with the UN, with non-governmental organizations in different countries and other post-Cold War operations after the UNTAC operation. Now, it's important also to remember that the creation of the UN volunteer program was in the wave of the creation of the Peace Corps. And at the time, there was increasing cost of technical cooperation for development in comparison to the needs. And at the time, it was the containment of communism by the so-called free world during the Cold War. UN volunteers were not just less expensive and competent at the same time, but they brought something different to the United Nations, which is at the heart of the United Nations agenda, which is selflessness and altruism. For me, as a UN volunteer at the time, it was a life-changing experience, which I explored the relationships between civilian and military in humanitarian and peacekeeping operations. I did a PhD research which is dedicated to Atsuhito Nakata on the concept of an international military volunteer force and its potential, but also the potential obstacles. And I worked for 30 years in both peacekeeping operations, humanitarian assistance, and development. Now, 30 years after the Cold War, the challenges of peace building are still there. They are different, but they are still there. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, where I work today for UNDP, those challenges include the pervasive effect of hate speech and divisive narratives, democratic governance and bringing about expanding the democratic space and fighting against mistrust towards political institutions, dealing with the past, war crimes, and sexual violence, as well as mobilizing youth and linking peace building with other agendas, such as raising awareness on environmental issues. There are also opportunities, for instance, new technologies and solutions too. Analysis of data, sociological and anthropological tools, artificial intelligence for better anticipation and stronger conflict prevention. This is a path on which UNDP and others have embarked and which is also promising. One question I asked myself before going to Cambodia, I had 2 or 3 days to make up my mind whether or not I wanted to go to Cambodia. And one question I asked myself at the time was whether or not it was simply ethical to organize elections in a country like Cambodia at the time that had been closed for so long, and whether there were not other things that Cambodia needed at the time. And it took I mean, after 2-3 days, I came to the conclusion that not only it was ethical, but that was probably what Cambodia needed at the time. And whatever would come out of it, there would be something positive about it. So that's why actually I joined UN volunteers in Cambodia, but also that's what happened in the end, in spite of the challenges. Now, in relation to the death of Atsuhito Nakata and the interpreter Lex Sophia on that day, others died in Cambodia, I mean, in different ways for different reasons, but that was a very striking event. A nagging question remains, was it worth it? And I would actually reverse the question, and I would ask, what is worth dying for? And we live in a world where there are lots of reasons to live, but sometimes there may be not enough causes that are worth dying for. When I arrived in Bosnia and Herzegovina about a year and a half ago, I had worked in 30 years in very different countries which all had in common to be in crisis, conflict, and where life was very difficult, sometimes the poorest countries in the world. And when I arrived in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a waiter in a cafe asked me, "Do you think this country has a future?" And that was the first time in those 30 years that someone, in spite of all the countries where people had such difficult lives, that I was asked this question about a specific country, that this country still had a future. And I was puzzled by that. And obviously, different countries have different destinies and realities. But that's what peace building ultimately boils down to. It is about restoring hope, and hope in the future. And because of the nature and the scale of the challenges, volunteers, and more specifically UN volunteers, but also volunteers, all the kinds of volunteers, millions of volunteers in the world, have a distinct and unique contribution to make, and can play a powerful role in supporting that agenda of peace building, that is of restoring hope. I have a very special thought today, of course, as all of us here, for Atsuhito Nakata and his father Nakata-san, who continued his mission and whom I met on several occasions, in particular in Atsu village on the 10th anniversary of the ambush. Thank you very much.